Venice, 1563. A ledger entry, written in iron-gall ink, records the state-approved cost of treating a galley slave's dislocated shoulder, 3 soldi. The same ledger records the cost of amputating an arm destroyed by ore impact, 8 soldi. The purchase price of a replacement Moorish slave in the Venetian market, 40 ducats. That is 3,200 soldi. A man's arm was worth 0.25% of his replacement cost. The Senate called this medicine. 35,000 men rowed Venetian galleys during the peak of the Republic's power. The Arsenale, Venice's state shipyard, the largest industrial complex in the medieval world, employed 16,000 workers in 1560 and could launch a fully armed war galley in a single day. European ambassadors watched this happen and wrote home that they had seen something they could not explain. The Ottoman fleet watched it and understood exactly what it meant. Each war galley needed 180 rowers. The Republic needed those benches filled continuously. No gaps, no delays, no renegotiation. So Venice built a pipeline. The first channel was the courts. The Council of 10, Venice's supreme judicial body, processed criminal convictions with one specific economic outcome already decided before the verdict, routing condemned bodies directly to the Arsenale labor pool. A counterfeiter received 3 years at the oar, a thief, 5, a murderer, life. The sentence was not a punishment scaled to the crime. It was a procurement order scaled to the fleet's quarterly needs. The second channel was the slave markets. Licensed Venetian merchants purchased Moorish, Albanian, Greek, and Slavic men in Ottoman ports, 35 to 50 ducats per able body, transported them west across the Adriatic, and sold them to the state at a markup that contemporary merchants recorded without embarrassment because the Senate had approved it. If this ledger of human lives is the kind of buried history you want more of, subscribe. There is worse in the archive. The oar itself was 12 meters of European oak. It weighed 250 kilograms. It was not rowed by one man. It was rowed by 3 to 5 men chained to the same bench, pulling the same loom in synchronized strokes, without rotation, without relief. Contemporary accounts describe the rowing formation as alla scalaxio, all bodies locked to a single oar, a single chain, a single rhythm, not a crew, not a team. A mechanism. If Venice could launch a war galley in a single day, how long did it take to break the men inside it? There is something that gets lost when historians discuss galley warfare. They focus on the battles, Lepanto, the Aegean engagements, the patrol routes through the Adriatic. The ships are the subject. The rowers are the infrastructure. What the Senato Mar records, surviving in the Archivio di Stato di Venezia, make clear is that the Venetian Senate did not think of its galley labor force as soldiers, servants, or even slaves in the conventional sense. They thought of them the way a modern port authority thinks of dry dock capacity, a resource to be maintained at minimum cost, replaced at known expense, and never allowed to fall below operational threshold. There were 3 categories of rower in the Venetian system: the purchased slave, the condemned criminal, and a third category, one whose presence in the ledgers has nearly vanished, who has no obvious reason to be there at all. Who were the men who rowed voluntarily, and what could possibly have made them choose the oar? A bunavaglia, in Venetian legal terminology, meant goodwill, a volunteer, a man who chose the oar freely, signed the contract, and accepted the advance. The records tell a different story. By the 1540s, the Council of 10 had formalized a sentencing mechanism that Venetian magistrates understood but never stated openly in court. Criminal judges were not operating on moral principles alone. They were operating against a quarterly procurement target, a minimum number of condonati ai remi, men condemned to the oar, required each year to maintain fleet readiness. The Senate's standing orders made this explicit. If civilian courts failed to produce sufficient bodies, naval commanders had authority to request emergency supplemental sentencing. Judges were filling purchase orders. The robes and the gavel were administrative costume. The forzati, convicted rowers, were chained differently than purchased slaves. A forzato wore a red wool cap, visible from the deck above, so officers could distinguish their legal category without descending to the bench level. He received a daily wage, 1 soldo, the cost of 2 loaves of bread. Free Venetian workers in the same decade earned 15 to 20 soldi daily. The cap and the coin were the Republic's instruments for maintaining the legal fiction that this was justice. that a man earning 1 soldo in chains was meaningfully different from a man earning nothing in chains. He was not. The third category, the buonavugli, closed the gap the courts and the slave markets left open. Debt cases, men who owed more than they could repay, men whose creditors had connections. The state would settle the debt in exchange for a signed labor contract, a term of 3 to 5 years at the oar, and an advance payment of 6 ducats, just enough to clear a modest obligation, not nearly enough to matter afterward. Venice paid no purchase price. The man arrived ambulatory, literate in some cases, already skilled with his hands. The contract was unbreakable until the term ended, or he died. Venice called them volunteers. They had no other word available to them. Winter Murano, 1558. Glassblow, 31 years old. His furnace debt, 120 ducats. The moneylender holding the note, a merchant with a seat on the minor council and a brother-in-law in the magistrate's office. When the case reached the court, the hearing lasted 11 minutes. This is not conjecture. Debt fraud hearings in the Council of Ten's records from this period average between 9 and 14 minutes. The verdict was decided before the man sat down. 3 years, buonavoglia. The state paid his debt. He received 6 ducats in coin, handed to him at the Arsenale gate the same afternoon. An officer wrote his name in a register, not the register of free men, the register of oar benches, bench 14, starboard. He had never been on a ship. The oar was already in position when he arrived at his station. 12 meters of dense oak, angled through the oarport, its inboard loom resting on a leather pad across the bench. 3 other men were already chained to it. None of them looked at him. The chain around his left ankle weighed approximately 800 grams. He would later estimate this by comparison to the glass weights he used in the furnace. An officer locked it, pocketed the key, did not speak. The commodore's drum began. He had assumed he would think about this later. During the night watches when the oar was shipped and the bench was still, he had assumed the oar moved, that a man pulled it and it responded. What he discovered in the first stroke was that 250 kilograms of oak does not respond to a man. A man responds to it. The loom came back at him with a force he had not prepared for. His hands slipped. The man next to him absorbed the difference without expression. The drum continued. 26 strokes per minute, 6 hours a day. His palms split before the first week ended. He would not stand upright for 3 years. Arsenale medical records from the 1560s contain a price schedule, not a medical chart, not a treatment protocol, a price schedule, the same administrative format Venice used for timber contracts and rope procurement. Each intervention has a line, each line has a cost. Infected rowing blisters, 2 soldi. Broken finger reset, 4 soldi. Heatstroke treatment, summer months, 6 soldi. Gangrenous limb amputation, 8 soldi. Death on board, burial preparation, 5 soldi. Read that last line again. Burying a dead rower cost less than amputating a living one. This was not oversight. The Arsenale's medical officer was not making moral calculations. He was making capital calculations. A man with 1 arm rows at reduced efficiency. A dead man is a vacancy that costs 40 ducats to fill. The price schedule existed because rower bodies were depreciating assets, and depreciating assets require maintenance cost tracking to determine at what point replacement becomes cheaper than repair. The oar appears differently now, not as a tool, not even as a prison. The medical officer read the angle of a man's wounds the way a forensic examiner reads a body. Wounds across the palm heel or impact. Lacerations on the left ankle, chain friction. Linear bruising across the upper back, horizontal, evenly spaced. The commodore's whip. Each wound type had a different ledger line. Each ledger line fed a different budget allocation. The oar was generating data. The men gripping it were the instruments. Here is what the Senate's procurement records, surviving in the Senato Mar registers, confirm in plain administrative language. The 30% death rate per 5-year term was not a failure the Republic was trying to correct. It was a figure the Republic was planning around. Buy 130 slaves to field 100 rowers. Assume 30 will not complete their term. Budget accordingly. The math held across decades. The galleys kept moving. Somewhere in that accounting, month 7, bench 14 starboard, the glassblow's shoulder dislocated. The medical officer was already reaching for the price list. 3 soldi charged to the rower's account. The deduction would appear on his discharge papers 3 years later, subtracted from his accumulated daily wage of 1 soldo, 1,095 soldi for 1,095 days. minus 3 soldi for the shoulder, minus additional deductions, the ledger records without explanation. He would leave the Arsenale with less than he arrived with. But that is later. This is month 7. Cometer was a man named in no surviving document by first name. Venetian records of this period identify rowing masters by surname and station only. What the records do preserve is his compensation structure, a base daily wage, plus 2 additional soldi per day if his galley maintained above average speed during fleet exercises and patrol rotations. This bonus was not trivial. Over a 6-month patrol season, it represented nearly a 40% increase in his annual income. His instrument was a whip, ox-hide, 1.2 meters. He did not use it in anger. He used it in rhythm. The stroke on a galley rowing alla Scalaccio runs at 26 pulls per minute during combat speed. Each stroke, an explosive coordinated pull lasting approximately 3.5 seconds, then controlled recovery. 6 to 8 hours of this during a battle engagement. The Cometer's whip struck at the bottom of the stroke, the moment of maximum fatigue when the body wants to release. A precisely timed strike drove the next pull. A strike too hard meant hands released the oar. Lost stroke. Lost speed, lost bonus. He had learned exactly how hard. The glassblower no longer felt the splinters. His palms had calloused, cracked, calloused again across 7 months until the skin no longer registered individual impacts. What he felt was the weight. The oar's loom returning to him at the start of each stroke, 250 kilograms of momentum that had to be met, absorbed, and redirected 26 times per minute, for 6 hours a day, with a dislocated shoulder that the medical officer had reset that morning and charged to his account. He had 28 months remaining. His benchmate had stopped eating. Supply chain that fed Venice's ore benches ran through 3 cities. Alexandria, where Egyptian and sub-Saharan African men were purchased at source, 3 to 5 ducats per able body. Constantinople, where Greek, Slavic, and Circassian captives moved through Ottoman markets at similar prices. Algiers, where North African Berber men and sub-Saharan Africans taken in coastal raids sold for slightly more, given their reputation among Venetian buyers for physical endurance. Transport cost to Venice, approximately 2 ducats per body. Medical inspection at the Arsenale gate, a physician checked teeth, hands, and spine, 0.5 ducats. Then the sale price to the state, 40 to 50 ducats. 1,000% markup was not greed. It was the license margin the Senate had approved, because the alternative was arithmetically worse. Paying competitive wages to free rowers would cost the fleet 300 to 400 ducats per galley per month. The slave pipeline purchase, transport, inspection, replacement of the expected dead cost approximately 52 ducats per bench across a 5-year term. A free rower across the same period, 900 ducats. The Senate did not maintain this system because it was cruel. Cruelty was incidental. It maintained this system because the ledger demanded it. It was a legal boundary, however. Free Venetian citizens could not be enslaved or condemned to the oar without a judicial conviction, a protection that mattered enormously inside Venice and meant almost nothing beyond it. Subjects of Venice's colonial territories, Crete, Cyprus, Corfu, the Dalmatian coast, carried no such protection. Colonial men could be impressed directly, without trial, without sentence, without the legal theater of a courtroom. They appear in the Arsenale registers with no name, no origin beyond geography, no legal status beyond utility. The ledger's entry for them from the islands. 40 years of this, then 1571, the Ottoman Empire moved against Cyprus with 60,000 soldiers and a fleet that outnumbered anything Venice could field alone. Cyprus fell in August. Its population, the same population Venice had been impressing into ore benches for generations, became Ottoman subjects overnight. The men from the islands who were already chained to Venetian oars when the island fell received no acknowledgement of this in their records. Cyprus fell to the Ottomans in 1571. Its rowers stayed chained. October, the Adriatic, 1560. The man on bench 14 starboard, the document calls him only the Moor, had been rowing for 19 months of a 5-year sentence. No surname survives, no origin beyond the ledger's designation, no age. The Arsenale record notes his purchase price, 42 ducats, and his bench assignment. Nothing else about him as a person exists in any document that has survived. He died during the night watch. The cause is not recorded. because the Arsenale's medical price schedule did not include a line for cause of death, only a line for the cost of handling it. He was unchained from the oar. His iron ankle ring, weight approximately 800 grams reusable, was removed and returned to the ship's inventory. Recorded value, 0.3 soldi. He was carried to the rail and dropped into the Adriatic without ceremony, because ceremony costs time and time at sea costs money. The Arsenale record the following morning, bench 14 starboard vacancy, replacement authorized, cost 40 ducats. That was the entirety of his existence in the Republic's memory. The glassblower was chained next to an empty space for 11 days before the replacement arrived. 11 days of rowing with 3 men on a bench built for 4, absorbing the dead man's share of the oar's weight without additional compensation, because the contract did not include provisions for reduced bench capacity. He had known the Moor for 19 months without sharing a language. They had developed a rowing rhythm together, the particular timing of 2 specific bodies on the same loom, and now that rhythm was gone, and the oar did not care. This is what the oar had become, not a tool of empire, not even a prison, a monument to a man the Republic had never recorded as a man. A 250-kilogram oak beam that had absorbed 19 months of his labor and now held only the memory of his grip, a memory that would last exactly until the replacement arrived and took his place and the drum began again. Think about that for a moment. A civilization that built churches with gold leaf ceilings and commissioned Titian to paint its doges, and could not find 4 words to record a man's name in a ledger it otherwise kept with extraordinary precision. Then came Lepanto, October 7, 1571, the largest galley engagement in recorded history, 400 ships, approximately 90,000 men. The Holy League, Venice, Spain, the Papal States, met the Ottoman fleet in the Gulf of Patras and destroyed it in 6 hours of combat, so concentrated that contemporary observers described the water turning red across a quarter-mile radius. After the battle, Holy League commanders freed approximately 15,000 Christian galley slaves from captured Ottoman ships. Men who had been rowing under Ottoman chains for years emerged onto the deck of a Christian vessel and were unshackled in front of cheering sailors. The Venetian ships in that same fleet, the ships that had just won the battle, did not unchain their rowers. Not during the fighting, not after. The men on Venetian oar benches rowed into Ottoman cannon fire chained to their stations. They could not take cover, they could not flee the deck. When Ottoman shot passed through the hull at bench level, and it did at Lepanto repeatedly, the men on those benches absorbed it where they sat, because the chain gave them no other option. They could not surrender, they could not choose, they could only pull. When Venice celebrated its greatest naval victory, bonfires on the Piazza San Marco, the Doge processing through the Basilica, Titian commissioned for a commemorative painting. How many of the men who made that victory possible were still in chains in the harbor below? Between 1490 and 1640, the 150-year peak of Venetian galley warfare, historians estimate that between 150,000 and 200,000 men passed through the oar bench system. Apply the 30% mortality rate the Senate itself built into its procurement planning. The number of men who died at the oar or directly from injuries sustained there falls between 45,000 and 60,000. Fewer than 200 of those deaths are recorded by name in any surviving Venetian document. The glassblower from Murano is not among them. Arsenale discharge records from 1561 contain a single entry, Forzato, glassworker Murano, bench 14 starboard, marking the completion of a 36-month term. He received his accumulated daily wage, 1,095 soldi, earned at 1 soldo per day across 1,095 days. From this, the Arsenale deducted 3 soldi for the shoulder resetting in month 7. Additional deductions appear without explanation, as was standard practice. The final payment recorded in the ledger, 12 ducats. He had arrived with a debt of 120 ducats, settled by the state in exchange for his body. He left with 12 ducats and a shoulder that contemporary records note as reduced mobility, permanent. The oar had billed him for the wound it gave him. The Republic considered the accounts settled. What happened to him after that gate closed behind him, whether he returned to Murano, whether his furnace was still there, whether anyone had kept it for him, the archive does not say. The ledger's interest in him ended the moment his bench was reassigned. He was not exceptional. He was not even particularly unfortunate by the standards of the system. He survived. He completed his term. He walked out. Most did not. A man who wrote his discharge papers, an Arsenale administrator, name preserved in the register's margin notation, had worked in the administrative offices for 11 years at that point. His handwriting appears across hundreds of discharge entries from this period, each one identical in structure: term length, daily wage, deductions, final payment. He wrote the glassblow's entry in approximately 90 seconds. 4 words in the condition column, the last column on the right side of the page, the column that determined whether a man's record was flagged for medical follow-up or simply closed. Term served, released, healthy. He had never once descended to the lower deck. The administrative offices were on the upper level of the Arsenale complex, facing the lagoon. From his window, on clear days, he could see the galleys in the basin below, their oars shipped, their hulls reflecting the winter light off the water. They were beautiful from that distance. Most things in Venice were. In 1797, Napoleon's forces occupied Venice and dismantled the republic that had governed it for over 1,000 years. In the chaos of that occupation, significant portions of the Arsenale's administrative archive were lost, some destroyed deliberately, some simply abandoned, some absorbed into French military records and never returned. What survived was curated in the decades that followed by Venetian historians operating inside a specific cultural project. The construction of a national mythology around the most serene republic, the jewel of civilization, the marvel of Renaissance governance. They preserved the battle records, the architectural surveys, the trade ledgers documenting Venice's commercial dominance, the paintings, the charters, the correspondence between doges and popes. The wound price lists did not survive. This was not necessarily deliberate. Archives burn, flood, get lost in transit, get misfiled, get deemed administratively irrelevant by the wrong official at the wrong moment. But the effect is the same regardless of intent. The document that valued a man's arm at 0.25% of his replacement cost no longer exists in its original form. What we have are references to it in secondary records, echoes of it in procurement budgets, the ghost of it in discharge entries that deduct medical costs without specifying the schedule that generated them. The Arsenale still stands. UNESCO lists it as a monument to Renaissance engineering. 3 million tourists pass through Venice annually. Most of them photograph the Bridge of Sighs, the covered bridge through which convicted prisoners were walked from the courtroom to the cells, and feel the appropriate cinematic chill. Fewer than 1 in 1,000 walks the additional 400 meters to the Arsenale's outer wall. Almost none of them know what the building processed, at what volume, across what decades. There is no memorial inside it to the men who were chained there. At the Museo Storico Naval, the Naval History Museum, a 10-minute walk from the Arsenale along the waterfront, there is a gallery of recovered maritime artifacts. Among them, a single war galley oar, recovered from a Venetian lagoon mud deposit in 1962. 12 meters of European oak, preserved by anaerobic sediment, carbon dated to approximately 1530 to 1560. The wood is darkened along the loom, the inboard section that rested across the bench, in a pattern consistent with decades of contact with human hands. The museum label identifies it as an example of 16th century Venetian naval technology. No one knows whose hands were last on it, whether those hands released it willingly at the end of a term, or whether they had to be uncurled from the wood by someone else, whether the oar entered the lagoon when a galley was decommissioned and stripped, or whether it went in with a man still attached to it and the chain was cut loose only after. The Republic's ledger does not say, because the ledger's interest ended the moment the bench was reassigned. The oar is in a glass case now. The museum closes at 6. Nobody stays after dark. Venice was not alone in this. Across the same decades, another Mediterranean power ran a galley labor system so structurally similar to Venice's that their procurement administrators exchanged correspondence about slave pricing and mortality planning. But that empire left behind something Venice never did, a document written not by an administrator, not by a senator, not by a historian building a mythology, but by a man who had sat at the oar himself. A man who wrote down, in his own language, what it felt like to be a line item in someone else's ledger. That document exists. It survived. And what it says about the civilization that chained him, there is not what either empire would have wanted recorded. Venice buried 60,000 deaths in administrative language, and it wasn't the only power that built an empire one chained man at a time.